Hi, everybody. Today is Monday, May 26, 2025, and our friend Paul Carrick Roberts is back with us. Welcome back.
Thank you, Nima.
Paul, here is what Donald Trump posted on his social media, on Social Truth, and he blames Vladimir Putin for killing not only soldiers but civilians as well. And he's talking about that he wants to capture, he wants to conquer all of Ukraine. And he says that this is not my war, it's Zelensky's, Putin's, as and Biden's war. Your take on what's going on after the talk, after the phone call between the two presidents? The outcome was somehow positive. What's going on in the United States right now in the mind of the Trump administration?
Uh, the Trump statement doesn't make any sense. Uh, Putin's at war, and it's not really merely with Ukraine, it's with the United States and the West, because we supply the drones and the missiles and the weapons and the money and the targeting information. And the Russian attack on Kiev uh, was a consequence of the Ukrainian drones that seemed to be an attack on Putin and his helicopter in Kursk. And I noticed that Trump didn't say anything about the fact that Putin was in a helicopter to Kursk to visit and see what's going on. And he found himself in the middle of a drone attack. Uh, I don't know whether this was an effort by us to kill Putin, but the drones, I think we're the ones that are responsible for Ukraine having them. And I think we still supply the targeting information. So maybe Trump's just covering up in his outrage against Putin, an effort of the United States to assassinate him. I mean, I don't know that. All I know is I saw a report of Putin finding himself in the middle of a drone attack in a helicopter. And what strikes me is Trump complains about civilians being killed in Ukraine, but not in Gaza. He's still equipping the Israelis with bombs and missiles and all kinds of backup. And he doesn't say anything about that. In fact, um, in his press conference with Netanyahu a few days ago, Trump accepted that the Palestinians would be removed from Gaza so that he or the U.S. Could turn the place into a resort. And since I think 95% of the buildings in Gaza are totally destroyed, there's no place for the people to live anyhow. But he says nothing about that. He says nothing about the drone attack that endangered Putin. He only complains that Putin replied to the drone attack. So what is going on? I don't know. I'm sticking for now to my view that Trump is not negotiating a peace in Ukraine. He is orchestrating it so the negotiations go nowhere, so he can pull out and walk away. Um, his policymakers um, are convinced that China is the main enemy and Russia is the weaker enemy. And so the United States has to sequence its conflicts with Russia and China. And for now, leave the Ukraine war to Europe and free the resources and attention of the United States government to focus on China. So I'm sticking to that. And I think that does explain Trump's statements that look ridiculous on their face, but they are working for him to say, well, look, I tried, I did everything, and you can't deal with these people. They're unreasonable. I'm washing my hands of it. So I think that's what's in the works, Nima.
Here is what German Chancellor Merz said, Paul, that is a particular concern, in my opinion. It says that Britain, France, Germany, and the United States have lifted restrictions on the range of military supplies to Ukraine. This means that they're going to send, we know that, I don't know about the United States, but Germany, we know that Germany was thinking about sending Taurus missiles to Ukraine. And he said they can use these weapons and targeting Russia. Are we headed? You mentioned that Donald Trump wants to walk away from the talks, from the peace agreement, from a Ukrainian settlement. But does that mean that we're going to see some sort of escalations in Ukraine?
I don't know how that will play out, Nima, but you know my position for years, since even before it started. I mean, I predicted that Putin would have to eventually go in to Ukraine and was putting it off for 8 years, hiding behind the Minsk agreement so he wouldn't have to do anything, but that it wouldn't work and he'd eventually be forced. And I've said from day one of that conflict that his way of conducting the conflict is a strategic disaster because it would ever widen the war. The war would get wider and wider. First of all, the way he's fighting, the war is going to last forever. And so we have time to get involved. Europe has time to get involved. And then all the weapons that we're not going to send, we send one after the other. The French want to send troops. Now the Germans say they're preparing for war for Russia. By 2029, they're prepared for offensive actions against Russia. It'll be the end of Germany. But so the war has done exactly what I said. It would widen until it's out of control. And what your question that you just asked me shows is it's on the verge of being out of control. We already had recently all 4 Moscow airports closed because of drone attacks. Well, how much of this can Russia put up with before they actually use their military force and end the war? And as you know, I have said time and time again, the reason Putin doesn't use the force is he wants to use the war to get a great power agreement, to get a mutual security agreement, a new Yalta, whatever you want to call it. He wants to get the agreement that he and Lavrov were unable to get in the winter of 2021, 2022. They did everything they could to get an agreement so they would not have to go into Donbass to protect the Russian people there from the Ukrainian army that the United States had built and equipped and trained. And so he's using this war, trying to turn negotiations into something bigger. It's not going to work. And all it's done is to widen the war. And the war is now so wide that it may spin out of control. You know, if they start firing these German long-range missiles into Moscow, even Putin will have to do something.
You mentioned that he's using the conflict in Ukraine as some sort of a bargaining chip. But is it going to be costly for Russia? Isn't that going to be costly for Russia in a long run? Because right now it doesn't seem that in the mind of Europeans, in the mind of Ukrainians, because we had a member of the parliament in Ukraine asking for more weapons. Here is what she said, Paul.
That the promise of President Trump to achieve peace through strength, that we were very hopeful with, that finally he will stop trying to appease Putin, negotiate with Putin, talk about Putin's respect, etc., 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 and move to really two things that actually worked: putting economic pressure on Russia so they would not be able to manufacture drones and missiles, and arming Ukraine the way that we can defend ourselves and push Russia back. This is a reality that needs to happen, and we just hope that there has been enough time, enough proofs, enough deaths for President Trump to finally realize what needs to happen next.
How can you let these people to negotiate with Putin, just leaving? So he said after the phone call he's gonna let the two parties talking to each other. These are not the people who want some sort of peace. They don't want to get rid of the conflict in Ukraine.
Yes, well, I certainly agree. I've said over and over that the peace negotiations are not sincere. Trump has not ever conducted them in a sincere way. They are being orchestrated to fail. And according to Wes Mitchell, a former high-ranking Trump defense official in Trump's first term, the Trump plan, the actual policy of the Trump administration, is to use the negotiations as a cover, as an excuse to walk away from Ukraine and refocus on China, because China is considered to be, by the American policymakers, America's more dangerous enemy than Russia, which they say is weak and is incapacitated by military losses, by sanctions. They can't even defeat the Ukrainian army after we're now into 4 years. And so we don't have to worry about the Russians because they don't amount to anything. So the Europeans can deal with them, but we've got to go deal with a real powerful foe, and that's China. Well, that's what Wes Mitchell says the policy is. He says that is the Trump policy. And it looks like that, Nima. I keep saying, if Trump wanted the negotiations to succeed, he would have conducted them in a totally different way. Instead, he's conducted them in a way that they can't possibly succeed. They're not supposed to. They're an excuse for the Americans to leave the conflict and refocus on a dangerous enemy. So I think that explains all of Trump's statements. He's saying, look, I'm getting fed up. I'm going to wash my hands. I'm going to walk away. Well, that's what he wants to do. He just has to create the pretext. And the pretext is that Putin's unreasonable, Zelensky's unreasonable. Nobody will make a good decision. And so he's going to leave it to them. And so the Europeans will step in and they will continue the war. And that's what the plan is. I don't know if Putin understands this or not. All I can say about Putin is that he's always bleed about negotiations. We're willing to negotiate. What he's hoping is to get something going that can be turned into an agreement far beyond the conflict in Ukraine. That's not Putin's focus, Ukraine. Never has been. He's fought the war in a way that's delayed any Russian victory. And clearly, there's no sign of any Russian interest in taking all of Ukraine. What we do see, however, is a slowly growing realization on the Kremlin that with Ukraine getting longer and longer range weapons to fire off into Russia, having Donbass and the 4 republics cleared of Ukraine isn't sufficient, that now they're going to have a buffer state. That is, they're going to have to take part of Ukraine that's not included in the 4 republics that are now part of Russia as a buffer to keep the Ukrainian forces further from Russia. Well, if Germans send missiles that are even longer range, then the buffer will get bigger, and eventually it will be the entirety of Ukraine. So the way we are conducting this policy against Russia, we are forcing them to eventually have to take all of Ukraine, because the Ukrainians keep getting longer and longer range weapons. So if you look at it, you can, I think, safely conclude this war is going to go on for a long time. I concluded already that Putin is never going to face up to the strategic blunder he's made by letting a war he should have won in 3 weeks go on. That we're now into the 4th year. And the weapons are flowing and flowing and getting longer range. And nowhere in Russia is becoming safe. Well, this is a strategic failure. It's probably the worst I know of in military history. And it's committed by Putin. So what's he going to do? He's let it happen because he wants to use the war for a bigger agreement, a broader understanding. He wants the hostility of the West toward Russia to cease. He wants to be part of the Western world. No bans, no sanctions, no aggression of any sort. That's what he wants. It's unrealistic. He is not going to get it. But he can't realize that. He can't give up this fairy tale dream he's got. And so he continues not to really fight. You can't say what the Russians are doing in Ukraine is fighting. It's taking casualties in order not to fight. There's no general in history who would have fought the war in Ukraine the way Putin has. There's no, even the worst general in history wouldn't have fought the war that way. And people complain. Prigozhin, what's his name? The head of the Wagner Group, he complained, so they take him out. The head of the Chechens who they're fighting, he complained. I don't know what's happened to him. I haven't heard another word about him. The troops complain. I noticed after one of our interviews, there were several hundred comments. Most of them were from Russians. And they were on my side. They said, why can't we win this war? Why can't we fight? What's wrong? A lot of them were the troops, I think. So
Yeah,
you have to see it the way it is. And if Trump is saying these things, he's creating the pretext for dropping it. And we already know that the United States has organized the Europeans to step in and fill the role. So I don't know what the Trump people have in mind about China. That's really going to be a disaster for us. And I don't know if they'll get there. because clearly the press conference that Trump had with Netanyahu that we talked about recently, clearly when Trump said Gaza is an American possession, and the media woman asked Netanyahu, well, how do you feel about that? And he more or less accepted. He's, not heartily, but smilingly, it's probably a good idea. So what we see here is Greater Israel is now off the agenda, and it's going to be Greater America. It's all going to be the Middle East. It's going to be an American neo-colonial empire. And it's going to be, and the anchor is going to be a redeveloped Gaza, a very expensive resort, all sorts of wonderful things for rich people. And it's the anchor for turning the Middle East into a big business proposition with the profits shared. Unlike earlier colonies where the French and the British carried everything away, Trump's prepared to share it with the people who are there. And I think that's the deal he made with the Saudis. And he probably has a deal like that in mind for Iran. But the question is whether the American neoconservatives can pull off some false flags that kind of provoke us into a war with Iran. If that happens, they're not going to be able to focus on China because a conflict with Iran in the Middle East will be far more demanding than the Ukrainian war. And so they won't be able to, whatever they have in mind for China, whatever Wes Mitchell and the rest of them intend to do to corral China and stop its growing influence, they'll never get to it. So I see that's the sort of paradigm of what's afoot. None of the official agendas are true. They're covers, or they're just stupid people who can't see the obvious facts. So I don't know what else to say about it.
Paul, if we assume that they're going to get back to the same sort of policies of the Biden administration, which would be sanctions and more weapons to Ukraine, how do you see Donald Trump? Do you see Donald Trump differently from what we've seen from the Biden administration in terms of putting pressure on China and India? Maybe India much more important for the new administration, for the Trump administration, because somehow J.D. Vance recently he was somehow trying to talk with Indians because of his wife. He somehow feels closer to Indians. He feels that he can make a deal with Indians in terms of to help them against Russia and China. But do you see India coordinating with the United States and going against Russia? We know India is so much important when it comes to the Russian energy.
Well, I think the United States will use money to try to purchase allies. Certainly they will do that. That might be their approach to corralling China. It's just that we give the Asian countries more money than China's willing to give them. As for India, India was a long time a Western colony, a British colony. They benefited from it. They know English. They have real universities. They can produce real engineers. They can produce real medical doctors. So India benefited, but they still resent being a colony. Putin has made it clear he doesn't believe in colonies. But now we have Trump talking about the new American colony in the Middle East. So I think the Indians are going to look at this and say, well, we're in BRICS. We're part of the new world that's emerging. The conflict with China, I don't think, is substantial. It's some sort of little border thing somewhere in an area that's not really important to either country. So I don't know whether it's stupid local authorities causing this, and the central authorities don't know about it and have to go in and stop it. I don't really know, but I don't think that anything would come out of India and China in a conflict. They're BRICS members. How can India survive if it's surrounded by BRICS and it's not a member? So what I really don't understand is how anyone expects Ukraine to continue the war when they haven't got anybody left to fight. You know, I can't remember the numbers, but I think half of the Ukrainian population left the country. Their casualties have been so high, they don't seem to have many men left of the normal military age. So they've been talking about taking teenagers. They've been talking about taking women. They've been talking about taking 60, 70-year-old men. Well, that's not an army that's going to do well up against Chechens and highly trained Russian troops. It's just not going to work. So who's going to do the fighting for Ukraine? What have they got left? You know, all the reports may be wrong, but there's no reason to put out reports that are unhelpful to your side. And these certainly are unhelpful reports. There's nobody left to fight. And so the Polish people, the Polish government said, oh, we're going to force all the Ukrainians that came here to go back to Ukraine and fight. So the Polish say they're going to deport all of the Ukrainian refugees. Well, we'll see if that happens. It's not easy to deport people, as Trump is finding out. So where do the fighters come from? And so that's why even a year or so ago, it was Macron in France is talking about sending the French Foreign Legion. And I think they did send some. Allegedly, they're not in the front lines. They're training or helping with supply or something. I don't know. The British are talking about it, and the Germans, and so they're talking, and the Poles. And so they're talking about now sending troops from EU countries, NATO countries. So the whole nature of the war is changing. It's no longer between Ukrainians and Russians, it's between Russians and Europeans. Well, how is that going to play out? I mean, at some point, Putin will have to give up his fairy tale idea of a new agreement, a great power agreement, and fight. And when that day comes, the fight will end very quickly. It will end almost immediately. And then what happens? Oh, the Americans will say, oh, we can't accept this humiliation, nuke them. And Putin, being a 19th century American liberal, which is what he is, may decide not to fight simply for that reason, that it will result in nukes if he wins. As we've talked before about, this may be the restraint on Iran, that if Iran actually gets attacked by the United States or Israel or both, They could very easily win that war, Iran. But if they do, they get nuked. So you don't ever really know if people will fight, even though they have all the cards, because it could result in nukes. You just don't know. You can't know. As you know, and I'm repeating myself so many times, I've said when we've talked that all of this would stop if there was a Russian, Iranian, Chinese joint defense pact. If they stood up in a press conference and said, an attack on one's an attack on all. And if the Russians and Chinese said, our nuclear umbrella covers Iran, it'd be over. All of it would be over. But they don't do that. Why? Do they think it's provocative? It's never provocative to prevent war. And they're so afraid, are they so afraid to be provocative they're going to cause a war? I just can't see where anyone, either side, has made a good decision for years. What in the world was the United States thinking when it overthrew the Ukrainian government and stuck in a Nazi puppet? What was it? What were we thinking? We destroyed Libya, we destroyed Iraq, we destroyed Syria. What for? This is mindless. And I've not seen one good decision made by any American president in the 21st century. Or even back into the 90s, into the Clintons. That's when the absence of any sensible decision anywhere in the world began. The Clinton regime. The interference in Yugoslavia, the breaking of the American word not to move NATO to Russia's borders. I mean, this is the most ridiculously stupid kinds of decisions. It shows people who don't have enough sense to justify their existence. They are so stupid. And the same with all the wars in the Middle East, our wars, all on false pretense. Every one of them. We all know now there was no valid reason for any of that. And it's destroyed an area. There's one Arabian country left, Saudi Arabia. And there's no reason to overthrow Ukraine and start all that trouble. And there's no reason for Putin to let it to go on forever until it gets so wide now that he's actually facing the likelihood he's going to be at war with Europe. Not a few Ukrainian Nazis, but Europe. Why? And the inability of the Chinese leadership, the Russian leadership, the Iranian leadership to see that what stops all of this is their announcement of a mutual security arrangement. They're so stupid they can't see that. Well, when you've got nothing but stupid people, you're going to get terrible mistakes. And that's what we've had 20 years of. And it looks like they're about to get worse. German Taurus missiles now, and French troops, British troops, Polish troops, German troops. And why is Germany announcing that they're going to be prepared for offensive operations against Russia in 2029? That's 4 years from now. Or 3.5 years from now. What does this achieve? More war, more death and destruction. And they're talking about peace negotiations. It's to stop all of this that Putin wants this great power agreement. But he's so unrealistic to think he could get such an agreement. He has to be blind to what's happening in front of his face. So that's my view of it, and I don't really think it matters what any of them say, because none of them have enough sense to say anything intelligent. And that goes for the foreign policy communities as well. If you look at the American foreign policy experts, you can't believe the stupid things they say. You just can't believe it. It's how could they be an expert? They don't know anything. It's ridiculous. Go read Johnson's Russia list every day. He publishes what he gleans from the magazines and the journals and the newspapers and the statements, the things that are important. If you look at them, it's not a sign of intelligence. Never. And the Russians, what do they talk about? They're talking about a new Yalta. And when you read their foreign policy people, it's the same sort of dreamy world like Putin. We're going to negotiate a nice future. Well, look at the negotiations so far. It's clear they're not sincere. There's nothing sincere about Zelensky or Trump. And I don't think Putin is focused on the war. He's focused on this grand agreement. This is not going to happen. So it's frustrating. It is extremely frustrating. And you can't get anybody to talk about it. They just think I'm some kind of an idiot, or I'm bloodthirsty. That's what they say. I'm not bloodthirsty. I'm trying to avoid the war that they are causing by their stupidities. I don't want any wars. I'm happy. I live in a beautiful national forest. It's beautiful. I got all kinds of creatures there. Eagles, bears, deers, wild turkeys, every kind of bird. I don't need a war.
Paul, we know that it seems that Donald Trump is optimistic about the talks between Iran and the United States. He said that maybe something big coming and we're going to announce it. But if we assume that they're getting along, they're going to get an agreement between the two countries, do you see the Netanyahu attacking Iran to sabotage any sort of agreement? How do you see a false flag operation, I don't know, whatever that would be, or a direct attack on Iran? Is that possible?
A false flag operation is possible. For example, they did that on the president in the Gulf of Tonkin and got the Vietnam War going. And the neoconservatives could, the American Zionists, neoconservatives, they, I think, are still well enough connected that they could pull off a false flag attack that would position Trump, even if he knew it was false flag. He couldn't say so, and he'd have to retaliate. I think that it's not certain they would succeed, but you look at what they got away with, 9/11. And look at the lies they got away with in Iraq, in Libya, in Syria. So they can get away with things. And the media never investigates or says, we don't believe your narrative. So it's not certain, but yes, the American neoconservatives could provoke a war even if Trump knows it's a false flag, he can't do anything except go to war. That's entirely possible. Now, Trump's always saying, we're going to have an agreement. I mean, how many times he say that about Ukraine? And now what's he saying? Yeah. And one of the points that the American side emphasizes over and over and over is that Iran cannot be permitted to enrich any uranium, even at the lowest possible level that could never possibly be used for a weapon. They simply have to be prohibited from ever enriching any uranium. Well, Iran has said, we're not going to agree to that. We're a sovereign nation. What do you mean telling us what we can do? In other words, it's not a negotiation with Iran. We've covered this before. Iran is given ultimatums that they have to accept. That's not a negotiation. It's the way Americans have conducted things for so long, they think it's negotiation. When you dictate to people, that's what Americans think negotiations are. You dictate to them and they do what you say or you punish them. Well, the Iranians don't look at negotiation that way. So how are they going to agree? I mean, every important policymaker in the Trump administration is out on the limb saying they can never be allowed to enrich anything, not even for atomic energy. So how do you get an agreement? Iran says this is nothing that we will even think about. And so Trump's saying we'll soon have a big agreement. Now, what I think may be going on is Trump really isn't negotiating about war matters with Iran. He's trying to deal with them like he approached the Saudis. You know, we're coming into your world here and we're going to make everybody rich. And you want to cooperate with us and share in this, we'll be partners. And I've already pointed out, as others have, the two biggest embassies in the world. One of them's in Iraq, and one of them's in Beirut. And they're far too big for embassy purposes, especially in those countries where there's practically no contact. There are no massive business deals or integration of industry or anything. Well, why do you have these massive things? They're the command and control centers for the American empire. I think this has been in the works for a long time, but Trump's the first one to reveal it. You know, we talked about his press conference with Netanyahu and what he was saying about how the Saudis are wonderful people and the Iranians are wonderful people and the Arabs are wonderful people and we're going to make them all rich. They're going to be happy. They're going to stop these wars. You heard him. Well, he's selling the empire. This is the front man in action, and he's creating the demand for the empire, the acceptance of it, by promising everybody a piece of it. It's not going to be a 19th century French or British empire where the French and British carried off everything and left nothing for the Arabs and the Indians and the Africans. His empire is we're going to share it all, but we're all going to get a lot richer. And the wars are over. We are now business partners. Well, that's not a bad plan. What's wrong with it? It's not a bad plan. And I'm sure that's the way Trump looks at it. And he does. He says, look, they've been doing the same thing over and over and over and over, and people keep dying and dying and dying and dying. I'm going to do something different. We're going to get rich. We got to be friends and make money together. Well, I think that he would like to have Iran in that. It's much better to make money than to pay the expense of war. And there are people in policymaking positions in the United States government, though now they have to be quiet because they could get fired, who are convinced that if we start a war with Iran, it's going to be very costly to us. Very costly. So costly, it could actually be humiliating. And so there are people in the military who understand how vulnerable our bases are, how vulnerable our aircraft carriers are, how vulnerable our aircraft are, and how unpredictable the Chinese and the Russian reaction would be. Nobody really knows. So when I say they're all stupid, there are some who aren't. But right now, they can't say much because the last ones that said something, they all got fired. Now that's my cat. You beat it. She's telling me that I'm talking too much, and she wants me to come give her some shrimp.
Paul, Paul, before wrapping up this session, I want to play a clip for you. The conservative leader Kemi Badenoch in the United Kingdom, and look at what she's talking about, Paul.
I can imagine.
Prime Minister John, and that actually you think that Mr. Netanyahu's language on this is justified.
I'm not here to police the language of the Prime Minister
I'm not
of
asking you
Israel.
to police it. I'm asking
what he has said. He sees
people need to know where you stand.
Yeah, but I've been very clear where I stand. Hamas is a terrorist group. They are not our friends.
I'm talking about what
Trevor,
you think about the Israelis'
Yes, but it's all related. Who funds Hamas? Iran, an enemy of this country. An enemy of this country. Israel is fighting a proxy war on behalf of the UK, just like Ukraine is on behalf of the Western Europe against Russia. We have to get serious. We have to get serious. There was a terrorist plot in London against the Israeli embassy. We saw 2 Jewish members of the Israeli embassy in DC killed. Whose side are we on? We need to make sure that the hostages are returned. No one wants to see a war in Gaza. Palestinians are suffering. Netanyahu is complaining that he thinks our leaders are carrying out the wrong action. He has every right to say that. What I want to see is Keir Starmer making sure that he is on the right side of British national interest.
Paul, she says that Israel is fighting a proxy war for the United Kingdom. It's so strange. It's so how can we imagine that? Who's the enemy that they're fighting against?
Russia. She said that we're fighting a proxy war against Russia. Now, maybe she meant to say Hamas. You know, I sometimes say the wrong word when I mean another word, and this can happen. So I don't know who.
No, she said what she said, Paul. What she said is she said that it's like Ukraine that is fighting a proxy war against Russia. Israel is doing the same in the Middle East on the part of the United Kingdom.
Yeah, that's what I said. But who is Israel fighting? Hamas or Russia? That's what wasn't clear to me. It doesn't matter. For your point, what I would say to this is, look, clearly, she has no idea of what she's talking about, but none of them do. Where do they get the information? You know, the newspaper headline or something. Everyone is a prisoner of the narratives. And if you don't stick with the narrative, then your own side goes after you because they want your position. everybody wants to be, you say she's the person in waiting to be prime minister if the Tories get back in. Well, everybody wants to be the person in waiting. So if she says anything intelligent, it doesn't fit the narrative. And so she'll get attacked from every side. And the press will say, well, she's discredited. We have to have another leader. That's the way it works. They can't say anything realistic because they're constrained by the narratives. Now, Trump is the only one who's broken the narrative. He broke the Greater Israel narrative and substituted the American colonial empire. But the rest of them, and look, if you look at the leadership in these countries, increasingly it's feminine. Increasingly, it's people of extremely limited experience. And increasingly, they don't represent their own ethnic populations. Now, let's see, a recent prime minister was an Indian, and now we have one that's going to be a Black African, and the mayor of London is a Muslim, isn't he? And you start looking, where are the British? Where are they? You look to Ireland, where are the Irish? If you paid attention to what the Assistant Attorney General in the United States said the other day in an interview with Tucker Carlson, she said she's in charge of the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department. She says, I've come in, I'm the head of a department. It's got 400 attorneys, 200 staff, there's 600 people. She said, in my part of the Justice Department, racism against white Americans is institutionalized. She said, when I told them we're going to enforce the laws the way they're written and not in terms of the way they're being enforced, which is to give privileges to DEI, 200 of them resigned on the spot and marched out the door. So here we had the United States Department of Justice, the Civil Rights Division, and they quit because they can't persecute white people anymore. Well, what kind of government do you think these countries have? I don't think they're capable of going to war with anybody. They're at war with themselves. If you talk to women in Europe, particularly Britain, Scandinavia, they say the government is against us. They won't even protect us from being raped publicly. We say anything about it, they want to arrest us for being racist because we're complaining against people of color. Well, that's the way the governments in the West are. Look at Marine Le Pen. She's the leader of the largest political party in France. They have more seats in the legislature than anybody, but they're not allowed to have power. So what do they do to her? They send us to the prison. Why? Because she represents French people, ethnic French people. Well, if the governments are against their own ethnic nationalities, what strength does the country have? None. None. They have no strength. Now, the difference is this is not the case in Russia or China. And so you've got a weak, wet paper bag going up against a pillar of iron. The only way the weak paper bag can win is the pillar of iron doesn't fight. And that's the current world. That's the world. All this talk about war and fight, and what do you think a European army would be worth on the battlefield? It would be worth 2 cents. So that's the reality. That's the reality. It really is the reality. I mean, it's extraordinary.
Paul, yeah, in my opinion, the both parties are using, when it comes to the Democratic Party, you see the Speaker of the White House, and you see all of that, and they use the people of color, and Asian Americans, African Americans, but the strategy is the same. They're just using the people. These are vehicles for their policies. As you look at this, look at this woman here. She talks that Israel is fighting a proxy war for us in the United Kingdom. She's not ethnically from the United Kingdom. She was used to be. Yeah.
That's just part of the defense of Israel. They're fighting a proxy war for us. That's just part. That's why you don't say anything about Israel, what they're doing to Palestine, because they're fighting for us. It's part of the defense. She can't say anything about Israel. She'd be removed from her position. Everybody knows that. She knows that. So she can protect her from saying anything about what Israel's doing by saying they're fighting for us. This has long been the strategy. Now, it's clear as day that in the United States, the agenda of the Democrat Party is to overthrow the existing societal arrangement and create privilege on the base of race and gender. So there's no more equality under the law because you create privilege on the basis of race and gender. And therefore, the way you do that is you load up the country with millions and millions of people who will be in the new privileged class. So that's the Democratic policy. That's why there's open borders. That's why they wouldn't let Trump build a wall. That's why we've got 30 million illegal entrants living here that we can't deport. The courts have blocked it, the Democrat judges. So the entire basis of the unity of the country is being eroded. It's becoming a Tower of Babel. And all of Europe is. It's a Tower of Babel. You don't have a country when there's no ethnic unity. You have a Tower of Babel. And all of the Western countries are being turned into Towers of Babel. Towers of Babel are militarily impotent. They are socially impotent. There's no unity. There's no safety. I don't know if we talked about it our last time, but there was last week in the French press report that 80% of French women want the French military on the streets in the cities, so it's safe for them to walk down the street. Now, how is that a country? If the women say we can't walk down the street unless the military is there protecting us while we do, at 80%. Now, maybe it's a hoax story, who knows? But it doesn't get any comment. Nobody says, how can this be? How can France be that unsafe? Is this true or not? Or how did it get this way? It just disappears. Well, It's the same in Sweden. The violence in Sweden, in Norway. It's if you know, people have forgotten World War II was the countries were ethnic countries. The Germans were Germans, the French were French, the British were British, the Americans were Americans. So that's not true anymore.
That would be, Paul, that would be in a perfect sort of world, but we are not living in a perfect world where half of the countries are destroyed and demolished. You look at the Middle East, you look at, you've mentioned all of them.
That's right.
Libya, Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, they have destroyed all of these countries.
That's right. And themselves. See, we not only destroyed Libya and Syria and Iraq and just about everywhere, but ourselves. We've destroyed ourselves. When the Assistant Attorney General of the United States says, my whole department is the institutionalization of racism against white Americans and Christians, she said. White Americans and Christians. Well, it has to be true. She's not going to say anything like that. It's not true. And she said, when I told them they had to stop and obey and enforce the law, she said they held crying sessions. And Tucker Carlson said, what do you mean? She says, well, they went in rooms and they cried that I was going to prevent them from discriminating against white Americans. And she said, and they held aggrieved sessions, and there was another type of thing. And then finally, they organized in a phalanx, and 200 of them marched out, resigned. Why? Because she stopped them from discriminating against white American citizens. Now, you tell me, how is there a country when the Department of Justice, who is supposed to enforce equal treatment under the law, is organized as a discriminating mechanism against white people? How did it get that way? What kind of erosion in awareness and belief systems did it take for that to be accepted long enough to become institutionalized? Well, you know, you can pretend that everything is multicultural, blah, blah. Multicultural means a Tower of Babel. It means no social unity, no common values, standards, language, religion. There's no cement that holds a society together. That's what they've achieved everywhere in the West. And so the only strength the West has is nuclear weapons, but they're in the hands of idiots and morons and people who think they're the salt of the earth and the right to tell other people what to do. And so they're prepared to nuke you. And that's probably what terrifies Putin and the Chinese and the Iranians, is that they're facing dangerous people who don't have any sense and have dangerous weapons. So, you know, it's going to become too expensive to you to have me on. People won't stand for this type of talk. They simply won't stand for it. They don't want to. They don't want to know. They don't want to know. It's threatening. It makes them feel worried.
It's better to talk about these differences and these, because we have to understand each other. It's Paul. I think it's important to talk about it. I totally disagree with anybody who's not willing to hear this. And
I know, Nima, I know. I agree with you, but it's still people can't take it. They just don't. They don't have the strength. It's too upsetting and oh, that could never happen here.
Yeah.
It already has. They
Yeah.
can't see it. Now you would have thought when the woman who is the Assistant Attorney General who said that on Tucker Carlson, that all hell would have broke loose. People say, how did this happen? How could this have happened? And you see, these are the anti-white people in the government that the judges won't let Trump remove.
Yeah.
So how is he going to make America great again when there are 3 million people in the United States government who hate the United States? And
Yeah. Paul, it was a great pleasure to talk to you today, as always.
Well, Nima, I'm glad you appreciate it. I don't know how many other people do.
Yeah, we get happy, sad, but that's the way that we should talk.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I talk this way because I think the situation is desperate.
Yeah.
And there's no point trying to dance around it or tiptoe through the tulips or anything like that. It's a desperate situation, Nima. It's very desperate. And there's no real awareness. They still talk about nuking people.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Nima.
And
Thank
see you soon.
Okay. All
Take
right.
care. Bye-bye.
All right. So long.
Bye-bye.